After my husband died, his 2 sons came for everything: the house, the business, the beach property. They wanted me out in 30 days. My lawyer begged me to fight. Instead, I signed every paper they put in front of me. The stepsons exchanged triumphant looks. One called me the old woman who finally sees reason. Then their lawyer read what I had actually signed. His face went white. The smiles disappeared. I watched them realize too late what their father had really left them. Comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has reached. But let me take you back to where it truly began, the moment I put pen to paper in that conference room. I appreciate you being here with me. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were working against you? Just yes or no. Your presence here truly matters. A quick note: some details have been shaped for storytelling. The message about family, trust, and justice is what I hope stays with you. I signed the papers while my stepsons smiled, and then their lawyer turned pale. Gordon Thornton, 46 years old, stood in the Dunn & Associates conference room in his tailored charcoal suit, his steel gray eyes sweeping over me with the cold calculation of a patent attorney evaluating a losing case. Beside him, Clayton, 3 years younger at 43, but looking older with his prematurely thinning hair and the permanent crease of worry between his brows, stood like a loyal lieutenant awaiting orders. They exchanged triumphant glances as my pen moved across the pages. "Sign here and here, Mrs. Thornton." Flynn Dunn's voice was steady, but his hands were not. At 56, he had been Percy's estate attorney for 16 years, a man who had navigated hostile boardrooms and bitter divorces without flinching. I had never seen his composure crack. Until now. I signed where he pointed. My hand did not tremble. "Finally," Gordon murmured to Clayton, not bothering to lower his voice. "The old woman sees reason." I kept signing, page after page. The October rain streaked the conference room windows, turning uptown Charlotte into smears of gray and glass. The scratch of my pen was the only sound in that room full of held breath. My stepson's reflections hovered behind me like vultures circling, waiting for the last breath to leave the body. Flynn turned to the final page. He scanned the document once, then again. His face drained of color so fast I thought he might faint. "Wait!" His voice cracked like ice giving way. "What is this?" Gordon's smile froze. Clayton leaned forward, confusion replacing victory. But I simply set down the pen and folded my hands in my lap. "That," I said quietly, "is exactly what I signed. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it truly began, 5 days earlier, in the house where my husband died and left me with nothing but questions. The funeral flowers were wilting when I finally entered Percy's home office. 3 days since we buried him beneath the old magnolia at Elmwood Cemetery, and I still could not bring myself to sit in his chair. Dying lilies and white roses crowded every surface, their sweetness turning sour, mixing with the leather and pipe tobacco smell that had always meant safety. Now it meant absence. At 64, I had spent 24 years as Percy Thornton's wife. 24 years of building something together, a life, a home, a love that his sons from his first marriage had never accepted. I wore my silver-streaked hair pinned back, the way he had always loved, still dressed in the black sheath from his funeral, because changing clothes felt like moving on, and I was not ready to move on. I touched the leather armrest where Percy's hands had worn it smooth over decades, as if I might still feel his warmth embedded in the grain. The October light through the window was gray and unforgiving. A cup of coffee sat on his desk, stone cold, untouched since his final morning. I had not been able to throw it away. Throwing it away meant admitting he was never coming back. Have you ever sat in a room full of memories and felt like a ghost haunting your own life? That was how I felt, suspended between the woman I had been and whoever I would have to become. Percy had handled everything: the finances, the investments, the complicated dance with his sons from his first marriage. He had always said he would take care of me, that I never needed to worry. I believed him, because believing him was easier than asking questions I was not sure I wanted answered. The sympathy cards were stacked on his desk in crooked piles. I had stopped opening them after the first dozen. They all said the same hollow things. So sorry for your loss. He was a wonderful man. If there is anything we can do. But there was nothing anyone could do. Percy Thornton, 71 years old, retired investment banker, beloved husband, complicated father, was gone. A heart attack in this very chair. Quick, they told me, painless, as if the speed of his death could soften the permanence of it. I picked up a card at random. The handwriting was unfamiliar looping and feminine, written in violet ink. Inside, just 2 words, he knew. I turned it over. No signature, no return address. He knew. Knew what? I set it aside with trembling fingers. Probably nothing. Probably someone's clumsy attempt at condolence. But a cold thread wound through my chest, settling somewhere beneath my ribs, like a splinter I could not reach. Then I heard the car doors slam in the driveway. I crossed to the window, my heart suddenly pounding. Through the beveled glass, I saw Gordon's silver BMW pulling into the circular drive. Clayton's black Mercedes right behind it. 2 brothers, 2 expensive cars, 3 days after burying their father. And they had not called, not visited, not sent so much as a text message. They had not come to comfort their stepmother. Their faces as they climbed out, Gordon's jaw set, with grim purpose. Clayton, clutching a manila folder against his chest like a weapon, told me everything their mouths had not said yet. They had come to collect. Gordon did not knock. He used his father's key, the one Percy had given him 20 years ago, for emergencies. I heard the front door open, heard their footsteps in the foyer, and by the time they reached the office doorway, I was standing with my back to the window, like a woman awaiting sentencing. Viola. Gordon's voice carried no warmth. He said my name the way one might acknowledge a piece of furniture that needed moving. We need to discuss Dad's estate. Clayton hovered behind him, clutching the manila folder I had seen from the window. Neither brother offered condolences. Neither mentioned the funeral, the flowers, the 24 years I had spent loving their father. They simply walked into Percy's office as if they already owned it, which I was about to learn they believed they did. Dad's will is quite clear, Gordon said, opening the folder with theatrical precision. He spread papers across Percy's desk, the desk where my husband had died, as if presenting evidence at trial. The house, valued at $920,000, goes to Clayton and me. The Outer Banks property, valued at $1.1 million, goes to us as well. Dad's shares in the shipping business, approximately $500,000 in current value, are to be divided equally between his sons. Each number hit me like a physical blow. Our home, our honeymoon cottage on the beach where we had watched sunsets for 2 decades. The business Percy had built with his own hands, all reduced to line items on their spreadsheet, all flowing neatly to his sons, while I stood there in my funeral dress with nothing. "And me?" I heard myself ask. Gordon's smile did not reach his eyes. "You received the life insurance policy, $220,000. Dad wanted to make sure you were taken care of. $220,000. After 24 years of marriage, after nursing Percy through 3 surgeries and 2 cancer scares, after building a life together in this house, filling it with memories and laughter and love. $220,000 and a 30-day eviction notice. We're not heartless," Clayton added, speaking for the first time. His voice was softer than his brother's, but no less certain. "You can stay in the house for 30 days while you make arrangements. Find an apartment. Get settled somewhere more appropriate for your situation." 30 days. My voice came out as a whisper. To uproot 24 years. "It's more than fair," Gordon said. "Legally, we could have asked you to leave immediately." I sank into Percy's chair, the leather creaking beneath me. The scent of his cologne still clung to the cushions, faint and fading. I thought of all the mornings I had brought him coffee in this room, all the evenings we had sat together while he worked late. I thought I knew this man. I thought I knew our life. Have you ever watched someone calculate your entire existence down to spare change and call it more than fair? "There is one more thing," Gordon said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. He pulled another document from the folder. His expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Dad's medical bills, the surgeries, the hospital stays, the specialists, $195,000 in outstanding charges. The room tilted. Percy had insurance. Excellent insurance. Not excellent enough, apparently. Gordon set the paper in front of me. "And since you were his wife, since you signed the consent forms and made the medical decisions, the hospital is looking to you for payment. It's unfortunate, but that's how these things work, legally." I stared at the number. $195,000. Subtracted from $220,000. $25,000 left. $25,000, I said quietly, to start over at 64. Clayton had the decency to look away. Gordon simply gathered his papers and tucked them back into the folder. "We'll give you time to process," he said. "The movers will contact you next week about scheduling. Try to be out before Thanksgiving. Clayton wants to host this year." They left the way they had come, without ceremony. I heard the front door close, heard their engine start, and fade down the driveway. The house settled into silence around me, and I sat motionless in Percy's chair as the afternoon light died through the windows. $25,000. No home, no property, no shares in the business Percy had promised would support me forever. Just a stack of medical bills and a month to disappear. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the light to shift from gray to amber to shadow. Long enough to feel the first cold edge of something sharper than grief. Something that felt dangerously close to anger. Eventually, I began opening the desk drawers, looking for what I could not say. Answers, perhaps? Evidence that Percy had not betrayed me so completely. Proof that the man I had loved had not reduced me to a footnote in his final act. My fingers touched something cold and metal, hidden beneath old receipts. I pulled it out and held it up to the fading light. A brass key, old and worn smooth from years of handling. Small, ornate. Unlike any key I recognized, it did not fit the front door. The safe, the filing cabinet. I had tried them all over the years, searching for spare keys. But Percy had hidden this one in his most private drawer, beneath 20 years of paper. Why? I had not slept. The brass key sat on my nightstand all night, asking questions I could not answer. What did it unlock? Why had Percy hidden it? And why, in 24 years of marriage, had he never mentioned its existence? By morning, I had made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. I dressed carefully, pinned my hair back, and drove to Flynn Dunn's office in uptown Charlotte with the key tucked deep in my purse. Flynn's corner office on the 15th floor overlooked the city skyline, morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. He had been Percy's attorney for 16 years, and in all that time I had never seen him look so uncomfortable. He removed his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on, removed them again. "Viola," he said finally, "I have to advise you in the strongest possible terms. Walking away from this would be a mistake." "The will seems clear enough," I said. "The boys get everything. I get the insurance, minus the medical bills." "That's just it." Flynn leaned forward, his voice dropping. "There are irregularities." Questions about Percy's mental state during the final revision. "The timing doesn't match the hospital records I've been able to pull. Percy was on heavy medication when this version was supposedly signed. We could contest it." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Then reality crushed it flat. How long would a contest take? "Months," he admitted. "Possibly years. Estate litigation moves slowly. Fighting would destroy me, even if I won. I would be a different person by the end of it, bitter and broke and hollow." I had seen what legal battles did to people. They consumed everything: savings, relationships, sanity. And at 64, I did not have years to spare on courtroom wars. "During those months or years," I said quietly, "what would I live on? The medical debts are my responsibility. The hospital has already sent collection notices. Interest accrues." Flynn's pen tapped against his desk. "There are options: emergency motions, temporary support orders, options that cost money I don't have, options that require me to prove my husband loved me enough to provide for me, while his sons stand in court arguing the opposite." I shook my head. "I'm 64 years old, Flynn. I don't have the luxury of fighting for years over money that might never come." He stared at me with something between frustration and pity. The expensive leather of his chair creaked as he shifted. His coffee sat untouched on the desk, steam long since faded. "Have you ever done the math on your own survival and realized the numbers simply do not add up, no matter how you arrange them?" I had spent all night running calculations. Even if I won a contest, attorney fees would devour half of any recovery. Meanwhile, the medical debt would mushroom with interest. Gordon and Clayton would drag proceedings out deliberately, burying me in motions and depositions. They had resources. They had time. I had neither. "What if I just gave them everything they want?" I asked. Flynn blinked. "I'm sorry. The house, the beach property, the business shares? What if I signed it all away, took the insurance money, paid the medical bills, and walked away with whatever's left. That would leave you with almost nothing. $25,000, I said. I've done the math. It's not nothing. It's a start. Flynn removed his glasses again, this time pressing his fingers against his eyes as if warding off a headache. Viola, Percy was my friend. I cannot in good conscience let you do this. That man spent 30 years building wealth, and he would never have wanted to. How quickly could it be done? His jaw tightened. A week, maybe 2. Simple quitclaim documents, waiver of contest rights. But why would you even consider? Because I'm tired. Flynn. The words came out steadier than I felt. I buried my husband 4 days ago. His sons have made it clear I'm unwelcome in my own home. And I don't have the strength for a war I might not win. I know what you are thinking. Why would anyone willingly surrender a 7-figure inheritance? Why sign away everything without a fight? But sometimes surrender is the opening move, not the final one. Flynn studied me with the intense focus that had made him one of Charlotte's most successful attorneys. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw the moment's suspicion replaced confusion. In 30 years of practice, he said slowly, I have never had a client voluntarily walk away from an inheritance like this. There has to be something I'm missing. There was, but I could not explain the key burning a hole in my purse, the weight of it pressing against my hip like a secret waiting to be told. I could not explain the feeling that had kept me awake all night, the certainty that Percy had hidden something, and that brass key was meant for me to find. Draw up the papers, I said, rising from my chair. I'll sign whatever needs signing. Flynn stood as well, his expression troubled. At least give yourself a few more days. Don't make this decision while you're grieving. A few more days. I agreed, though we both knew I had already made up my mind. I left his office with the key still hidden in my purse, and a plan beginning to form in the back of my mind. If Percy had kept secrets, I intended to find them before I signed anything. I spread Percy's wallet contents across the kitchen table, like evidence at a crime scene. The hospital had returned his personal effects in a clear plastic bag, the kind they use for the belongings of the dead. His watch, his wedding ring, his worn leather wallet. I had not been able to open it until now. 4 days after the funeral and hours after leaving Flynn's office with questions multiplying in my mind. The wallet smelled faintly of his cologne, and I had to close my eyes for a moment before I could continue. Then I forced myself to be methodical. Driver's license, 2 credit cards, insurance card, $47 in cash. A faded photograph of us at the Outer Banks, 15 years younger and laughing at something I could no longer remember. Behind the driver's license, tucked so carefully it was nearly invisible, I found a small business card. First Citizens Bank, Tryon Street branch. On the back, in Percy's careful handwriting, Box 247. I held the card up to the kitchen light, my hands trembling. The brass key, the safety deposit box. Percy had hidden them separately, the key in his desk and the card in his wallet, as if he wanted to make sure no one could find both by accident. He wanted someone to search, someone who loved him enough to look. Percy had been playing chess while I thought we were playing house. Every move calculated, every piece positioned for a game I had not known we were playing. Box 247, 3 digits that might change everything, or might contain nothing more than old stock certificates and disappointment. But Percy had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this. A man does not create such elaborate secrets without reason. "Percy," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "what were you hiding from me? Or hiding for me?" The distinction mattered. I needed to believe it was the latter. I spent the rest of that night searching the house. Every drawer, every cabinet, every pocket of every coat in every closet. I checked behind picture frames and beneath loose floorboards. I emptied the filing cabinet in Percy's office and spread decades of documents across the floor, searching for anything that might connect to the key, the bank card, the mystery my husband had left behind. I found nothing. By midnight, my fingers ached and my eyes burned from reading faded receipts and old tax returns. The coffee I had brewed hours ago sat cold and bitter on Percy's desk, but I drank it anyway, needing the caffeine more than the taste. When did my husband become a stranger? Or had I simply never known how to look? 24 years of marriage, and I had trusted him completely. I had let him handle the finances, the investments, the complicated legal matters that made my head spin. I had believed him when he said everything was taken care of. I had believed him when he said I would never have to worry. Now I sat alone in a house that would not be mine in 30 days, searching for proof that his love had been more than words. The clock in the hallway chimed 2, then 3. The house creaked and settled around me, full of shadows and memories. I moved from room to room, checking places I had already checked, hoping I had missed something. But whatever Percy had wanted me to find, he had made certain the boys could not stumble across it first. The secret was not in this house. It was locked in a vault downtown, waiting behind a door that only the brass key could open. The bank would not open for another 4 hours. 4 hours of waiting, wondering, imagining what my husband had buried in that metal box. I was standing at the living room window, watching the empty street and counting the minutes, when headlights swept across the glass. I stepped back instinctively, pressing myself against the wall. A silver BMW rolled slowly past the house. Gordon's car, unmistakable in the streetlight's glow. It did not stop. It did not speed up. It simply cruised by at 3 in the morning, the driver's silhouette turning to look at the darkened windows. Watching. My heart hammered against my ribs as the taillights disappeared around the corner. Gordon was surveilling the house at 3 in the morning, when any normal person would be asleep. He had driven across town to check on his stepmother. They knew something was wrong. They had sensed it in my willingness to surrender, in my questions to Flynn, in whatever instinct predators develop for wounded prey. They just did not know what. I had to get to that safety deposit box before they figured it out. The minutes crawled by like hours. I showered, dressed, applied makeup with trembling hands to hide the exhaustion carved into my face. I ate toast I could not taste and drank coffee I did not need. And when the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I was already in my car, the brass key clutched in my fist and the bank's address programmed into my phone. Whatever Percy had hidden, I would find it before his sons could stop me. The bank manager led me down marble steps into a vault that smelled like old money and older secrets. I had arrived at First Citizens Bank the moment the doors opened, scanning the lobby for any sign of Gordon's silver BMW or Clayton's Mercedes. Nothing. Either they had not figured out where I was going, or they were already inside waiting. But the lobby was quiet. Just early morning customers and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Margaret Holbrook, the branch manager, was a kind woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had recognized Percy's name immediately, her face softening with genuine sympathy. "Mr. Thornton was very specific about this box," she said, as she led me through the security door and down into the vault. "Only you and he had access. He opened it about 9 months ago." 9 months. Right when Percy's health started declining. Right when he began having those mysterious business meetings that always left him tired and quiet. I had assumed it was the illness wearing him down. Now I wondered what else he had been carrying. The vault was cool and silent, rows of metal boxes gleaming under soft lights. Margaret stopped at box 247, larger than I had expected, a full 18 inches wide. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Thornton," she said, unlocking the outer mechanism with her master key. "I'll be right outside." I inserted the brass key into the inner lock. It turned smoothly, as if Percy had oiled it recently. The box slid out, heavy in my hands, and I carried it to the private viewing room with my heart pounding against my ribs. My hands shook so badly I could barely lift the lid. Not from age, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what my husband had known and never told me. Inside, I found folders, thick manila folders stuffed with documents, arranged in careful order. I spread them across the viewing table, my breath catching as I began to understand what Percy had assembled. Email printouts, dozens of them, exchanges between Gordon and someone named Marcus Crawford. The dates stretched back nearly a year, long before Percy's final hospitalization. "We need to move faster on the transfer protocols," Gordon had written in one dated 7 months ago. "Dad's getting worse. The doctors think he's got maybe 6 months." The reply chilled me to the bone. "What about the wife?" Gordon's response, "She won't be a problem. She doesn't understand the business side. By the time she figures out what happened, it'll be too late to contest anything." I had to read it twice before the meaning sank in, 3 times before I could breathe again. They had been planning this for months, while I was holding Percy's hand through chemotherapy, while I was sleeping in hospital chairs and learning to give injections. His sons were plotting to steal everything from under us both. Imagine reading your husband's final message and realizing he had been fighting a war you never knew existed. I kept reading. Bank statements for accounts I had never heard of. Accounts in Percy's name that did not appear in the estate documents Gordon had shown me. Investment records, property deeds, a second will, notarized and witnessed, dated 3 months before Percy's death. My head spun. There was too much, too many documents, too many revelations, too many lies unraveling at once. I forced myself to slow down, to read carefully, to understand what my husband had built in these final months of his life. The next folder contained photographs, surveillance photographs, clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. Gordon entering a building I did not recognize. Tall glass doors, neon signs visible in the reflection. The same building, different nights, different outfits. A pattern of visits spanning months. Casinos. Gordon was entering casinos. I flipped through the photos, my stomach turning. Gordon at poker tables. Gordon at ATM machines inside the casino. Gordon signing markers. The photographs were time-stamped, organized chronologically, building a case through images alone. The final folder was thicker than the others, bound with a rubber band that snapped when I pulled it. The cover was stamped with words that made me catch my breath. Private Investigation Confidential. Theodore Platt, forensic accountant and licensed investigator. Percy had hired a private investigator to investigate his own sons. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first page was a summary, typed neatly and dated 2 months before Percy died. Subject: Gordon Thornton, documented evidence of gambling addiction. Estimated losses exceeding $260,000 over 18 months. Multiple forged signatures on business documents transferring company assets. Recommend pursuing charges for forgery and elder financial abuse. Subject: Clayton Thornton, evidence of investment fraud through shell company Blue Harbor Holdings. Preliminary evidence suggests Ponzi-style structure defrauding multiple investors. Recommend further investigation and potential referral to SEC. I sat back in my chair, the folder still open in my hands. The vault's silence pressed against my ears like cotton. Percy had known. He had known everything. The gambling, the forgery, the fraud. And instead of confronting his sons, instead of cutting them off, he had quietly built a case, documented every crime, prepare evidence that could send them both to prison. Then he had hidden it all in a box that only I could open. The envelope at the bottom of the stack caught my eye. Percy's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. For Viola, open last. The emails were dated 8 months ago. Percy was still walking then, still laughing, still believing his sons loved him. I set aside the envelope marked for me. Percy had asked me to open it last, and I would honor that request and spread the email printouts across the viewing table in chronological order. What I had glimpsed before was only the surface. Now I read everything, every calculated word, every cold negotiation between Gordon and the man who helped him commit fraud. Marcus Crawford. The name appeared throughout the emails. A business associate who had helped Gordon structure the theft. I did not know him, had never heard Percy mention him, but his words on the page painted a picture of someone comfortable with deception. "Can you expedite the paperwork?" Gordon had written in March. "Dad's oncologist says the new treatment isn't working. We need to accelerate the timeline." Marcus replied within hours. "The shell companies are ready. Once your father signs the revised partnership documents, we can begin transferring assets. The business restructuring will look legitimate on paper. And if he refuses to sign, then we use the power of attorney you mentioned, the one from his first hospitalization." I stopped reading. My hands were trembling again, and I had to press them flat against the table to steady myself. Power of attorney. Gordon had power of attorney from Percy's first cancer scare 3 years ago. Percy had signed it as a precaution, never imagining his son would use it to steal from him. How do you mourn a father while planning to rob his widow? Gordon had managed it without breaking a sweat. I forced myself to continue reading. The emails spanned months, a paper trail of premeditation that made my stomach turn. They discussed timing, waiting until Percy was too weak to review documents carefully. They discussed misdirection, keeping me busy with caregiving so I would not notice financial irregularities. They discussed contingencies, what to do if Percy's attorney asked questions, how to handle the estate if Percy died before the transfers were complete. "What about Viola?" Marcus had asked in one email. Gordon's reply was brief. She trusts Dad completely. She won't question anything until it's too late. He was right. I had trusted Percy. I had trusted the systems he built, the protections he promised. I never imagined I would need to protect myself from his own children. The investigation folder contained more than emails. Theodore Platt had been thorough. There were bank statements showing Gordon's law practice bleeding money, more going out than coming in, month after month. Credit card bills, loan applications, and photographs. The surveillance photos were time-stamped and organized. Gordon entering a casino in Atlantic City, January 15th. Gordon at the same casino. January 18th. Gordon at a different casino in Connecticut. February 2nd. The pattern repeated across months. A man feeding an addiction he could not control. The photographs told a story of someone drowning in his own appetites, reaching for his dying father's fortune like a life raft that might keep him afloat a little longer. One creditor's letter caught my eye, tucked between casino photos. Final notice before collection action. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in legal proceedings and potential asset seizure. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Percy died. Gordon had been desperate. The gambling debts were crushing him. His law practice was failing, and creditors were circling. No wonder he had rushed to claim the estate. No wonder he wanted me out of the house in 30 days. He needed to liquidate everything before his creditors came calling. Percy had documented it all. Every trip, every debt, every desperate lie his eldest son told to keep the house of cards standing. And he had done it quietly, without confrontation, building a case that could destroy Gordon's reputation and send him to prison. Why? Why not simply cut Gordon off? Why not change the will and be done with it? The answer, I suspected, was in the envelope I had not yet opened. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what Percy had uncovered. Then I saw the second folder. Clayton's name was typed across the tab in the same neat font. The folder was thicker than Gordon's, nearly twice the size, stuffed with documents and photographs and financial records. I pulled it toward me with dread pooling in my stomach. If Gordon's crimes were bad enough to warrant prosecution, what had Clayton done that required even more documentation? The summary page answered my question in stark red letters stamped across the top. Wire fraud. Elder financial abuse. Recommend immediate prosecution. Beneath the stamps. Theodore Platt had written a single paragraph that made my blood run cold. Subject Clayton Thornton operates a fraudulent investment consulting business under the name Blue Harbor Holdings. Investigation reveals systematic theft from elderly clients through falsified returns and Ponzi-style reinvestment structures. Total documented losses to date exceed $340,000. Multiple victims identified. Ages ranging from 67 to 84. Evidence sufficient for federal wire fraud charges and state elder abuse prosecution. Clayton had not just stolen from his father. He had built a business on stealing from the elderly people like me, people who trusted him with their retirement savings. And Percy had known about it all. How does a father document his own son's crimes without his heart breaking with every page? I turned through Clayton's investigation file with hands that no longer trembled. The shock had passed somewhere in the last hour, replaced by something colder and more focused. Percy had done this work while dying of cancer. The least I could do was bear witness to what he uncovered. The file contained victim statements, not anonymous numbers, but names, ages, photographs. retirement account balances before and after Clayton Thornton got his hands on them. Eleanor Whitfield, 74, former schoolteacher, invested $62,000 in Blue Harbor Holdings on Clayton's recommendation. Current account value, 0. Robert and Martha Jennings, both 79, married 53 years, entrusted their entire retirement savings to Clayton after meeting him at their church. Total loss, $89,000. The list continued. 12 names. 12 elderly people who had trusted their financial advisor because he seemed like such a nice young man from such a good family. 12 families whose golden years had been stolen by a man who smiled at funeral receptions and demanded his stepmother vacate her home within 30 days. I want you to understand something. Clayton did not steal from corporations or faceless institutions. He stole from widows, from retirees, from people exactly like me, people who had worked their entire lives and trusted the wrong person with their future. The investigator's notes detailed how Clayton operated. He promised guaranteed returns, showed falsified statements, used new investors' money to pay fake dividends to earlier victims. A classic Ponzi structure, Theodore Platt had written, designed to collapse when the money ran out. Clayton had been weeks away from that collapse when Percy died. No wonder Clayton wanted his inheritance so badly. He needed the cash to keep his scheme afloat, to pay off the victims who were starting to ask questions, to avoid the federal investigation that was surely coming. I closed the folder and sat in silence for a long moment. The bank vault's filtered air hummed around me. Somewhere above, Charlotte was waking up to an ordinary Thursday morning. Down here, I was holding evidence that could destroy 2 lives. Finally, I reached for the envelope I had been avoiding. Percy's handwriting on the front, shaky but unmistakable. For Viola, open last. The paper inside was soft, worn at the edges, as if he had held it many times before sealing it away. 3 pages, filled with his familiar script. I began to read, and Percy's voice filled my head as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. "My dearest Viola," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the boys have shown their true colors. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive." Percy's handwriting blurred as tears fell on the paper. His final words to me, written while cancer was stealing him away, and I had not even known. "I discovered what they were planning about 6 months ago," he continued. "Gordon came to me asking for a loan, a large one, larger than he should have needed. When I started asking questions, he became evasive. That's when I hired Theodore Platt. What Theodore found broke my heart. Both boys, Viola, both of them stealing, lying, scheming to take everything we built. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to cut them off completely. But then I realized if I did that while I was alive, they would simply wait me out. They would contest any will that excluded them. They would drag you through years of litigation while you grieved. So I made a different plan. I turned the page, my breath catching. The house has a mortgage now. $1.4 million, taken out 6 months ago and hidden in accounts the boys don't know about. The beach property has a mortgage too, $1 million, on paper. They're inheriting real estate worth $2 million. In reality, they're inheriting $2.4 million in debt. The numbers hit me like physical blows. Percy had turned their inheritance into a trap. The life insurance policy they know about is $220,000. But there's a second policy they don't know about, another $330,000, naming only you as beneficiary. And that's just the beginning. Viola, there are accounts, investment accounts, offshore trusts, retirement funds, all in your name, all completely legal, all hidden from the boys for years. Theodore has the details. The total comes to approximately $5.2 million. I set the letter down. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear. I couldn't protect you while I was alive, my love. The cancer moved too fast, and I ran out of time to explain everything properly. But I could protect you from beyond. The boys think they're stealing from a helpless widow. What they don't know is that the widow holds all the cards. Find Theodore Platt. Trust him. And when the time is right, show my sons exactly what their father thought of them. The letter was signed with a single word, Percy. I folded the pages carefully and pressed them against my heart. My husband had not abandoned me. He had spent his dying months building me a fortress, arming me with evidence, transforming me from victim to victor. Now I just had to decide how to use it. I was still holding Percy's letter when my phone rang. Clayton's name glowed on the screen like a warning. For a moment, I simply stared at it. The bank vault hummed around me, filled with evidence that could send this man to prison. And here he was, calling to check on his grieving stepmother. I took a breath, composed my voice into something weak and grateful, and answered. Clayton, how kind of you to call. Viola. His voice dripped with practiced warmth. I've been thinking about you all day. How are you holding up? Oh, you know. I let my voice crack slightly. One moment at a time. Of course, of course. Listen, we'd love to have you over for dinner tonight. Sonia's making her famous herb-crusted salmon. Gordon's coming too. We thought it would be nice to spend some family time together before we finalize all the legal matters. Family time. As if we had ever been family. As if he had not just spent months planning to rob me while his father was dying. That's so thoughtful, I said. I would like that very much. Wonderful. 7 o'clock. You remember the address? Myers Park. Yes, I remember. Perfect. And Viola? He paused, his voice softening into something that was meant to sound sincere. We really want you to know how much we appreciate how gracefully you're handling everything. Dad would be proud. Dad would be proud. The words hung in the air after I ended the call, echoing like a curse. If Clayton only knew what his father had actually thought of him. If he could see the investigation files, the victim lists, the careful documentation of every crime. Percy had spent his final months building a case against his own sons, and Clayton was praising me for handling things gracefully. How do you share a meal with someone whose crimes you have just documented? You smile, you chew, you wait. I gathered the folders and the letter, returned the empty box to Margaret, and drove home with evidence of 2 felonies tucked in my handbag. The afternoon light was golden on the Charlotte skyline, ordinary and beautiful, as if the world had not just tilted on its axis. At home, I showered and stood before my closet, considering. What does a defeated widow wear to dinner with her husband's killers? Not his literal killers, perhaps, but close enough. They had hastened his death with their stress and their schemes. They had made his final months a battleground instead of a farewell. I chose a simple black dress, understated, grieving. The kind of thing a woman wears when she has given up fighting and just wants the pain to end. I applied minimal makeup, enough to look presentable, but not enough to look strong. I practiced the expression in the mirror. Beaten, bewildered, ready to surrender. It was the performance of my life. I was about to walk into a den of wolves wearing sheep's clothing, but underneath, I had teeth of my own now. Percy had made sure of that. I tucked his letter into my purse, folded small and hidden in an inner pocket. The brass key went beside it. These were my talismans, my proof that I was not the helpless widow they believed me to be. Whatever happened tonight, I would remember what I knew. I would watch them lie and smile and plot, and I would catalog every tell. The drive to Myers Park took 20 minutes. I used the time to rehearse my role. Confused about finances, yes. Grateful for their guidance, absolutely. Eager to sign whatever documents would make the transition easier, of course. They would see what they expected to see, a 64-year-old woman out of her depth, clinging to the nearest life raft, even if it was made of sharks. You might think I was afraid. I was not. For the first time since Percy died, I knew exactly who I was dealing with. There is a strange comfort in certainty, even when the certainty is terrible. Gordon and Clayton were criminals. They had stolen from their father, planned to steal from me, and built their comfortable lives on the suffering of others. The mystery was solved. The enemy was named. Now I just needed to understand their timeline. How quickly did they need me to sign? What debts were pressing? Which creditors were circling? The dinner would tell me everything, if I listened carefully enough. The GPS announced that I was 5 minutes from Clayton's house. Through the windshield, I could see the glow of Myers Park's expensive streets' manicured lawns, German cars in circular driveways, houses that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. All that borrowed luxury, all those lies stacked like cards, waiting for the slightest breeze to knock them down. I touched Percy's letter through the leather of my purse. My husband had given me everything. I needed evidence, resources, and most importantly, knowledge. The brothers thought they were inviting a lamb to dinner. They had no idea they were about to feed a lion. Clayton's house appeared around the final curve. Lights blazed from every window. Gordon's silver BMW was already in the driveway, parked beside Clayton's Mercedes. The front door opened as I pulled in, and Clayton stepped out with his arms spread wide in welcome. I fixed my defeated widow expression firmly in place and stepped out of the car. Time to see how well I could act. Sonia answered the door in a dress that cost more than most people's rent, her smile as polished as the marble foyer behind her. "Viola, you look wonderful," she exclaimed, pulling me into an air kiss that barely grazed my cheek. At 39, Sonia Thornton had the practiced elegance of a woman who had married well and decorated accordingly. Her interior design business had failed years ago, but you would never know it from the way she moved through this house, all confidence and casual luxury, as if she had earned every penny herself. She had not. I knew now exactly whose retirement accounts had paid for the Italian marble, the crystal chandelier, the original artwork lining the hallway. "How are you holding up?" Sonia continued, guiding me toward the living room. "We've been so worried about you, all alone in that big house." "One day at a time," I said, letting my voice carry the appropriate tremor. Gordon was already lounging in the study with a scotch, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it. The bottle on the sideboard probably cost more than Eleanor Whitfield's monthly pension before Clayton stole it. "Mother," Gordon said, standing for a brief hug that lasted exactly 1 second. "You're looking better. I was worried about you after our conversation." "Your concern means so much," I said, and watched something flicker behind his eyes. Suspicion, guilt with Gordon. It was hard to tell. Clayton emerged from the kitchen with a bottle of wine and that warm smile I now recognized as pure performance. "Viola, I'm so glad you could make it. Families should be together during times like these. Have you ever eaten dinner with people who called you mother while planning to leave you homeless?" The salmon was excellent. I tasted nothing but ash. We moved to the dining room, a space designed to impress. Sonia had outdone herself. Linen napkins, heavy silverware, flowers arranged just so. I cataloged every detail with new eyes. The painting over the sideboard was an original, purchased 6 months ago according to the investigation files. The dining set was imported Italian. The wine was French and expensive. All of it paid for with stolen money. All of it purchased while elderly victims wondered why their accounts showed false balances. "We wanted to discuss the transition," Clayton began. He was mean filling my glass with wine I would not drink. "Make sure you're comfortable with everything before you meet with Flynn again." "That's very thoughtful," I said. Gordon leaned forward. "The sooner we finalize the paperwork, the sooner you can start fresh. A clean break. Mother, that's what you need right now. A clean break. As if 24 years of marriage could be severed like a business contract. As if I were a loose end to be tied off and forgotten." Sonia reached for a manila folder that had been positioned on the sideboard, casual and deliberate. "We've prepared some papers, just to complement what Flynn is handling." Our attorney drew them up. Nothing complicated, just standard releases and transfers. They moved around me like gracious hosts at a slaughter, offering wine, commenting on my appearance, sharpening their knives between courses. I did not touch the folder. Instead, I cut a piece of salmon and chewed thoughtfully. I appreciate all of this, really, but I should mention that I've been doing some thinking. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. "Thinking?" Clayton's voice was carefully neutral. "About what?" "The medical bills, mostly." I set down my fork and dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. "That's such a large sum. I've been wondering if there might be other options. Insurance appeals, payment plans, that sort of thing." Gordon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Just for a second. But I saw it. "The bills are what they are," he said, recovering smoothly. "We've already looked into it. The insurance company won't budge, and payment plans would just drag things out. Better to settle everything now." "I suppose you're right." I picked up my fork again, took another bite. "It's just that Percy always handled these things, and I'm finding all sorts of confusing documents as I go through his papers. Bank statements I don't recognize, account numbers that don't match anything in our files." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Clayton and Gordon exchanged a glance so quick I would have missed it if I had not been watching for exactly that. Something passed between them. Alarm, calculation, a wordless question. "What kind of documents?" Sonia asked, her voice a shade too bright. "Oh, nothing important, I'm sure." I waved my hand dismissively. "I'm probably just confused. Percy kept such complicated records. I never could understand his filing system." Sonia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "I'll get dessert. Tiramisu. Clayton's favorite. She fled to the kitchen, and in the silence she left behind, I felt both brothers studying me with new wariness. Their masks were still in place, but something had shifted beneath the surface. I had said something wrong, or rather, something right. They were beginning to suspect I was not as broken as I appeared. Gordon lifted his scotch and took a long swallow. Clayton adjusted his napkin. Neither spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked through the tension, counting seconds neither of us would acknowledge. I smiled pleasantly and waited for dessert. Sonia's chocolate torte arrived, and I decided it was time to see what these boys were really made of. The tension from my earlier comments still hung in the air like smoke. Clayton cut into the dessert with exaggerated care, while Gordon swirled the last of his scotch. Neither had spoken since Sonia retreated to the kitchen. Now she was back, arranging plates with the nervous energy of a woman who sensed something wrong but could not name it. "This looks wonderful," I said, accepting my slice. "Sonia, you've outdone yourself." "Thank you." Her smile flickered uncertainly between her husband and his brother. I took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and set down my fork. "You know, I've been spending a lot of time in Percy's office lately, going through all his papers." "That must be difficult," Clayton said carefully. "It is, but also confusing." I paused, letting the word hang. "I keep finding documents I don't understand. Bank statements for accounts I've never heard of. Investment records that don't match anything in our regular files." Gordon's fork clattered against his plate. The sound was sharp in the quiet dining room. "What kinds of documents?" Clayton asked, his voice slightly strained. "Oh, nothing important, I'm sure. Percy always kept such complicated records." I dabbed my lips with the napkin. Although I did find something strange in his desk drawer. A safety deposit box key I'd never seen before. "Isn't that odd?" Did you catch that? The exact moment when Gordon realized his stepmother might not be as helpless as he had assumed. His face went pale. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I had been watching for it. The blood drained from his cheeks, and his hand tightened around his scotch glass until his knuckles whitened. "A safety deposit box," he repeated. "Yes, old brass key, very small. I have no idea what bank it's for or what Percy might have kept there." I smiled pleasantly. "Did he ever mention anything to either of you?" "No," Clayton said quickly, too quickly. "Dad never discussed his banking with us." "Of course not. I'm sure it's nothing." I took another bite of torte. "I'll probably just take it to Flynn and let him figure it out. He handles all the estate matters anyway." The brothers exchanged another of those lightning-fast glances. I could almost see the gears turning behind their eyes, recalculating, reassessing, wondering how much of their scheme was already exposed. The safety deposit box was supposed to be a secret. Percy had set it up specifically so his sons would not know about it. And now here was their stepmother, casually mentioning she had found the key. "Mother," Gordon said, leaning forward with an intensity that bordered on desperation, "you shouldn't worry yourself with all that paperwork. Let Clayton and me help you sort through what's important. We can come by tomorrow, go through everything together." "That's very kind of you. We insist," Clayton added. "Dad would have wanted us to take care of you." I set down my fork and folded my napkin. Of course, family should help family. But my smile had teeth now, and they could feel it. Something had shifted in the room. A subtle change in the balance of power that none of us acknowledged, but all of us sensed. I stood. "It's getting late, and I'm still so tired. Thank you for a lovely dinner." The goodbyes were rushed, distracted. Sonia pressed a container of leftover salmon into my hands. Clayton walked me to the door, with his hand hovering near my elbow as if I might bolt. Gordon hung back, already reaching for his phone. I took my time walking to my car, fishing for keys, adjusting my purse, giving them time to think I was out of earshot. As I opened the driver's door, I heard Gordon's voice behind me, low and urgent. He had stepped onto the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in tight circles. "We have a problem," he was saying. "She found the key. I don't know how much she knows, but we need to move faster." I slid into my car and closed the door quietly. Through the rear-view mirror, I watched Gordon pace, gesturing frantically with his free hand. Clayton appeared in the doorway, watching his brother with undisguised alarm. Watching Gordon panic in that driveway was the first moment since Percy's death that I felt something other than grief. I felt power. I pulled out slowly, headlights sweeping across the manicured lawn. In the mirror, Gordon stopped pacing to watch me leave, phone still pressed to his ear. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. They were scared. Good. I was 3 blocks away when my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled over to check it, expecting Clayton with some excuse to come back, some new manipulation. The text was from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Theodore Platt from Platt & Associates. I believe you may have received some documents that were prepared by my office. We need to meet as soon as possible. There are things about your husband's estate you need to know. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Theodore Platt, the investigator Percy had hired, the man who had documented every crime. I saved the number and pulled back onto the road. Tomorrow, the next piece of the puzzle would fall into place. I called the number back before I even reached my driveway. Some things could not wait until morning. The phone rang twice before a calm, measured voice answered. "Mrs. Thornton, I hoped you would call tonight." "Mr. Platt." I parked in the driveway but did not turn off the engine. "You said there are things I need to know." "There are." A pause, weighted with 9 months of waiting. "Your husband was very specific in his instructions. If you found the safety deposit box, I was to contact you within 24 hours, no sooner. He wanted you to see the evidence first, to understand what his sons had done, before I explained the rest. You've been waiting all this time." 9 months, Mrs. Thornton. Percy hired me when he first suspected something was wrong. By the time we finished the investigation, he knew everything, and he planned accordingly. I sat in the darkness of my car, the engine humming, Gordon's frantic phone call still echoing in my memory. Percy had been playing a game of chess against his own sons, and I was only now seeing the board for the first time. "Can you come to my office first thing tomorrow?" Platt asked. "There's a great deal to discuss, and some of it is time-sensitive. The boys will be making moves now that they suspect you know something." "Where is your office?" "Noda District. I'll text you the address." His voice softened slightly. "And, Mrs. What you've discovered so far is only part of the picture. Your husband loved you very much. Everything he did in those final months was designed to protect you." I could not speak for a moment. The grief I had been holding at bay rose up, mixing with something new, gratitude, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "Thank you," I managed. "I'll be there at 9. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw documents and numbers, Gordon's pale face, Clayton's nervous glances. By dawn, I was dressed and ready, Percy's letter tucked in my purse like a talisman. Theodore Platt's office was nothing like Flynn Dunn's corporate tower. It occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in Noda, the kind of building that had once housed textile workers and now hosted artists and entrepreneurs. The sign on the door was simple: Platt and Associates, Forensic Accounting. The man who answered my knock was soft-spoken and unassuming. Theodore Platt, 66 years old, had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the calloused hands of someone who had worked for everything he earned. His office smelled of old paper and coffee, organized chaos covering every surface. Mrs. Thornton. He shook my hand with genuine warmth. Percy spoke of you often. Please, sit down. How do you mourn a man you are only now beginning to understand? Percy had depths I never suspected, secrets kept, not from malice, but from love. Plans laid in shadows, while cancer stole him away. Your husband hired me about 9 months ago, Platt began, settling into his chair across from me. Initially, it was just to investigate some financial irregularities he'd noticed in the family business. Gordon had been making withdrawals that didn't add up. Clayton's investment consulting firm was showing patterns that concerned him. He never mentioned any of this to me. He didn't want to worry you, not until he knew for certain. Platt pulled a thick folder from the stack on his desk. But as we uncovered more information, my role expanded significantly. Your husband was a very thorough man, Mrs. Thornton. By the end, I wasn't just investigating. I was helping him build a fortress against his own sons. Platt's expression was grim. What exactly did you find in the safety deposit box? I described the contents, the emails, the victim lists, the investigation summaries. Platt nodded along, unsurprised by any of it. That was the evidence file, he said. Enough to prove what the boys did. But there's more, much more. The folder Platt opened was 3 inches thick. 9 months of investigation. 9 months of evidence. Percy didn't just document their crimes, Platt said, spreading papers across his desk. He restructured everything. Bank accounts, property holdings, insurance policies, all of it was reorganized in the months before he died. I saw bank statements I had never encountered, account numbers that meant nothing to me, transfer records dated during Percy's final weeks. And then I saw a balance that made me grip the armrest of my chair. Your husband moved $5.2 million into protected accounts, Platt said quietly. Trusts, offshore holdings, retirement vehicles, all completely legal, all completely hidden from the estate the boys think they're inheriting. These accounts are in your name only. The boys have no idea this money exists. The number hung in the air between us. $5 million. More money than I had ever imagined. But that's not all, Platt continued, pulling out another set of documents. The properties, the house and the beach cottage, those are where it gets interesting. The boys think they're inheriting valuable real estate. What they don't know is what Percy did to those properties 6 months ago. He slid a document across the desk. A mortgage statement. I leaned forward to read it. The mortgage statement showed a balance that made my breath catch. $1.4 million secured against the Charlotte house. Percy had taken out the loan 6 months before he died, and I had never known. I don't understand, I said slowly. Percy refinanced the house without telling me? He did more than refinance. Platt pulled out another document. He leveraged both properties to their maximum value, The beach cottage carries another $1 million in liens. On paper, the boys are inheriting real estate worth roughly $2 million. In reality, they're inheriting $2.4 million in debt. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of what Percy had done. The house Gordon and Clayton were so eager to claim. The beach property they had already been discussing how to divide. All of it mortgaged beyond its value. They'll owe $600,000 more than the properties are worth. Platt continued. And given their existing financial problems, Gordon's gambling debts, Clayton's fraudulent business, no bank will refinance them. They can't sell without taking a massive loss. They can't keep the properties without making payments they can't afford. Where did the mortgage money go? Into the protected accounts I mentioned, the ones only you can access. Platt's voice was gentle but precise. Your husband moved every liquid asset he could reach into trusts that bypass probate entirely. Gordon and Clayton have no legal claim to any of it. Do you understand what Percy did? He gave his sons exactly what they asked for and made sure it would destroy them. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out barely above a whisper. Because he knew you, Platt said simply. He knew you'd want to help them. Even after everything, you'd feel guilty about the hidden money. You'd offer to share, to mediate, to make peace. He paused. Percy loved you for that kindness, but he also knew his sons would exploit it. I thought of all those months of Percy's illness. The business meetings I assumed were routine. The paperwork he reviewed late at night, saying it was nothing important. He had been fighting a war I never knew existed, building fortifications around me while cancer was stealing his strength. How long had Percy been planning this? How many sleepless nights had he spent protecting me from the sons he had raised? The trusts are ironclad.
Platt continued, spreading more documents across the desk.
I worked with an estate attorney in Raleigh to structure them properly. The boys' attorneys can challenge all they want, but these accounts are protected by layers of legal firewalls. It would take years and hundreds of thousands in legal fees just to get a hearing. And they don't have that kind of money. Exactly. Gordon's gambling has drained his resources. Clayton's scheme is on the verge of collapse. They were counting on Percy's estate to save them. Platt's expression was grim. Instead, they're going to inherit a financial anchor that will drag them under. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the scope of what Percy had constructed. The inheritance Gordon and Clayton were so eager to claim was a bear trap disguised as a treasure chest. Every asset they thought they were stealing was actually a liability waiting to explode. But there's more, Platt said, reaching for one final folder. Your husband didn't just leave them dead. He left you choices. He slid a document across the desk. Legal paper. Heavy bond stock, covered in dense paragraphs of formal language. At the top, the words, last will and testament. The will Gordon showed you was legitimate, Platt said, but it was superseded 6 weeks before Percy died. While he was still lucid and his doctors could verify his mental competence, he signed a new will. This one. I picked up the document with trembling hands. The signatures at the bottom were Percy's, shaky but clear, witnessed by Theodore Platt and a notary whose name I did not recognize. This will leaves everything to you, Platt said quietly. The house, the beach property, the business shares, everything. The boys received nothing except what's explicitly stated, a $1 inheritance each. And I quote, in recognition of the values they have demonstrated through their actions. $1. Percy had left his sons $1 each. The earlier will the one they're operating under can be invalidated the moment you choose to produce this one. Gordon and Clayton would inherit nothing. The properties would come to you, mortgages and all. But since you control the hidden accounts, you could pay off those mortgages and own everything free and clear. And they would have nothing. Nothing except the consequences of their own crimes. Platt pulled out one more sheet. This is a summary of prosecutable offenses: elder financial abuse, wire fraud, forgery, securities violations. If you choose to pursue it, both brothers could face federal charges. The papers sat between us, heavy with possibility. Percy had given me more than money. He had given me power. The power to destroy his sons completely, or to let them destroy themselves. You don't have to decide anything today, Platt said gently. But the brothers are getting nervous. They'll make a move soon, and when they do, you'll need to be ready. I folded the real will carefully and placed it in my purse, next to Percy's letter. I'll be ready, I said. The will was dated October 3rd, 6 weeks before Percy died. 3 weeks after he started having those mysterious meetings I had attributed to his declining health. I read the language slowly, letting each phrase sink in. Percy's attorney had drafted it in clear, precise terms that left no room for interpretation. The house, the beach property, the business shares, the hidden accounts, everything came to me. But one clause made me stop and read it twice. I leave the decision of what, if anything, my sons shall inherit entirely to my beloved wife Viola, trusting in her wisdom and judgment to determine what they deserve. He gave me the choice, I whispered. Total control over what they receive. Complete discretion, Platt confirmed. The will Gordon showed you was valid when it was written, but this one supersedes it entirely. Under North Carolina law, the latter will controls. They have no legal claim to anything unless you actively choose to give it to them. C.H. I set the document down and stared at the ceiling of Platt's modest office. Outside, Charlotte was going about its morning traffic humming, people rushing to jobs, ordinary life continuing, while my world rearranged itself around this single piece of paper. Think about that for a moment. Percy gave me the power to decide if his own sons received anything at all. He could have cut them off entirely. He could have prosecuted them himself. Instead, he trusted me, trusted my judgment, my compassion, my anger to determine their fate. That is not revenge. That is love. There's one more thing, Platt said, reaching for the final folder on his desk. This one was thicker than the others, bound with a rubber band and marked with a red tab. The criminal evidence. Everything we gathered over 9 months of investigation. He opened the folder and began laying documents in rows across his desk. Forgery, Gordon's signature on documents Percy never authorized. Wire fraud. Clayton's transfers from elderly clients to offshore accounts. Elder financial abuse. Both brothers accessing Percy's business accounts while he was incapacitated. Grand larceny. The systematic theft of company assets. The papers covered his desk like a mosaic of betrayal. Bank records, emails, surveillance photographs, victim statements. Everything Percy had collected, organized, and preserved. If you choose to pursue criminal charges, Platt said quietly, we have more than enough evidence to ensure convictions. What would you do with evidence that could destroy 2 lives? Would you use it? Would you burn it? Would you wait? What are we talking about, I asked, in terms of sentences? Gordon forgery and elder financial abuse. 5 to 10 years, depending on the judge. His law license would be revoked permanently. Platt's voice remained steady, clinical. Clayton is more complicated. Wire fraud carries federal penalties. The theft from elderly clients triggers enhanced sentencing guidelines. He could be looking at 15 years or more. 15 years. Gordon would be nearly 60 when he got out. Clayton would be pushing 60 himself. Their careers, their reputations, their comfortable lives, all of it would evaporate the moment I signed a complaint. Your husband could have had them arrested while he was still alive. Platt continued. He had everything he needed. The district attorney would have taken this case in a heartbeat, but he didn't. No, he chose to give you the power to decide their fate. Platt leaned back in his chair. Percy told me once that he raised those boys, but he didn't make them who they became. Their choices were their own, and he believed that you, the woman they dismissed and disrespected for 24 years, deserved to be the one who held them accountable. I held the folder in my hands. Years of their lives, their freedom, their futures, all reduced to paper and ink and my decision. The weight of it was staggering. I had never wanted power over anyone. I had spent my marriage as Percy's partner, his companion, his support. I had accepted my role in the family hierarchy, content to be dismissed by stepsons who saw me as an interloper rather than family. Now I held their destruction in my hands, and I had to decide what kind of woman I wanted to be. What do you want from them? Platt asked finally. I stared at the evidence spread across his desk. Forgery, fraud, theft, lies. These men had called me mother while planning to leave me homeless. They had rushed to claim their inheritance before Percy's body was cold. They had calculated my entire life down to spare change and called it generous. I want them to understand, I said slowly, exactly how it feels to have everything taken away. Platt nodded, as if he had been waiting for precisely that answer. Then I have a suggestion, he said, one that gives them everything they asked for and ensures they regret it for the rest of their lives. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began to write. Have you ever heard of a gift deed, Mrs. Thornton? I had not. But as Platt began to explain, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, not grief. Something sharper, more focused. The beginning of a plan that would give Gordon and Clayton exactly what they deserved. I leaned forward to listen. Platt leaned back in his chair and studied me with a calm assessment of a man who had seen many clients wrestle with revenge. A gift deed, he began, is exactly what it sounds like. You transfer ownership of property to someone else as a gift. No sale, no payment required. It's commonly used between family members and the mortgages. Transfer with the property. His eyes held mine steadily. When you gift someone real estate, they receive all associated encumbrances. Every lien, every loan, every debt attached to that property becomes their legal responsibility the moment they accept ownership. I sat back, letting the implications settle. The house Gordon and Clayton were so desperate to claim. The beach property they had already discussed selling, both mortgaged far beyond their value. So I give them the properties, I said slowly, and they inherit the debt. Exactly. The gift deed is perfectly legal. You're giving them what they ask for the house, the beach cottage, just with all the obligations attached. Platt pulled out a legal pad and began sketching numbers. They'll have 30 days to refinance or assume the existing loans. Given Gordon's gambling history and Clayton's fraud exposure, no legitimate bank will touch them. What happens then? Foreclosure. The banks will seize the properties. But foreclosure doesn't eliminate the debt. It only satisfies what the property is worth. Your stepsons will still owe the deficiency balance. The gift deed was a Trojan horse. Beautiful on the outside. Look, your stepmother is giving you everything you wanted. Destruction waiting within. They'll lose the properties anyway, I said, and still owe hundreds of thousands. Correct. Between the two mortgages, they're looking at nearly $600,000 in debt they cannot discharge through bankruptcy, given the circumstances of its creation. Financial ruin, credit destruction, potential loss of professional licenses. Platt set down his pen. All from accepting a gift? I stared at the numbers on his legal pad. Percy had built this trap with surgical precision. Every mortgage, every lien, every financial maneuver designed to turn his son's greed into their undoing. And he had left me the trigger. There's another option, Platt said quietly. The criminal evidence. You could pursue prosecution instead of, or in addition to, the financial consequences. Before I tell you what I decided, I need you to understand something. Comment A if you think I should have chosen prison for them. B if financial ruin was the right call, and add a few words explaining why. Please note, some details ahead are dramatized to capture the emotional weight. The lesson is what matters. What do you want, Mrs. Thornton? Platt asked. Revenge, criminal charges, prison time, public humiliation, or freedom, walk away wealthy while they inherit nothing but debt and consequences. Before I tell you what I decided, I need you to understand something. This was not about hatred. It was about balance. Gordon and Clayton had spent months planning to leave me homeless. They had forged documents stolen from elderly victims, schemed against their dying father. They deserved consequences. But prison years behind bars, their lives completely destroyed, that felt like something else. That felt like vengeance. And vengeance was not what Percy had asked of me. I want justice, I said finally, not revenge. I want them to face consequences for what they've done. But I don't want them in a cell. Let them live with what they've become. Platt nodded slowly. Then we give them exactly what they asked for. The inheritance. All of it. And we let their own greed destroy them. Yes. The criminal evidence stays in reserve, he continued. If they try to retaliate, if they challenge the gift deed or harass you in any way, we file charges. But otherwise they live with the consequences. They wake up every morning knowing they destroyed themselves. Percy had given me the weapons. Now I was choosing which ones to use and which to leave sheathed. Platt began drafting the gift deed while I watched. His pen moved steadily across the legal paper, transforming my decision into binding language. Transfer of property. Assumption of encumbrances. Acknowledgement of gift. By this time tomorrow. Gordon and Clayton would own properties worth $2 million and owe debts they could never pay. The irony was perfect. They would receive exactly what they had demanded their father's real estate transferred into their names. Only then would they discover the trap. Only then would they understand what Percy had really thought of them. How long before they realize? I asked. The first mortgage payment is due in 3 weeks. When they can't make it, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. Within 60 days, they'll understand the full scope of what they've inherited. 60 days of watching their lives unravel. 60 days of scrambling for loans no one would give them. 60 days of understanding, slowly and painfully, that their stepmother had played them better than they had ever played her. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and saw Gordon's name on the screen. A text, all capitals. Mother, we need to meet. There's been a development. Come to Flynn Dunn's office, now. Platt looked up from his drafting. Problem. I showed him the screen. His expression remained calm, but something sharpened in his eyes. They've discovered something, he said. They don't know what yet, but they're scared. Good, I said, standing. Let them be scared a little longer. I slipped the phone back into my purse and headed for the door. Gordon's voice cracked on the word documents, the first time I had ever heard him sound afraid. He had called within minutes of sending the text, unable to wait for a reply. I sat in my car outside Theodore Platt's office and listened to my stepson unravel. Someone from a firm called Platt & Associates contacted Clayton this morning, Gordon said, his words tumbling over each other. They claim to have documents that supersede the will we've been working with. Legal documents. Mother, signed by Dad. That's very concerning, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Concerning Epp, it's outrageous. These people are clearly trying to take advantage of your grief. Someone heard about the estate and saw an opportunity. Gordon paused, and when he spoke again, the fear had sharpened into something closer to accusation. You haven't signed anything, have you? No one has approached you with papers to sign. I've only dealt with Flynn, I said. It was not technically a lie. Good, that's good. He exhaled heavily. We need to meet immediately. Flynn's office, as soon as you can get there. We'll figure out who these people are and shut them down before they cause any real damage. Did you hear it? That crack in Gordon's voice? For the first time in 46 years. My stepson was learning what it felt like to not be in control. All those years of calculated confidence, of treating me like an inconvenience to be managed, and now he was calling me for help, terrified that someone was about to steal what he thought he had already stolen. I'll be there in an hour, I said. I ended the call and sat in the silence of my car, watching Charlotte's morning traffic flow past. Gordon and Clayton had learned about Platt's documents, but they did not know what those documents contained. They were flying blind into a trap of their own making, convinced they were protecting the estate from fraud, when they were the fraudsters. The irony was almost too perfect. I drove home and took my time preparing. This was not a meeting to rush into. This was a performance, and every detail mattered. I chose the black dress Percy had always said made me look formidable, fitted, elegant, severe. I fastened the pearl earrings he had given me for our 20th anniversary. I applied makeup with the care of a woman going to war, not a widow going to negotiate. I was a widow putting on armor, a victim becoming a verdict. The gift deed went into my purse first, folded neatly in its envelope. Then Theodore Platt's business card, though I would not need it. He was already on his way to Flynn's office, having received my text the moment Gordon's call ended. Finally, the evidence folder. I hesitated over that one, weighing its heft in my hands. Years of freedom, years of prison, the nuclear option. Platt had called it. I tucked it into my bag alongside everything else. Better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. The drive to uptown Charlotte took 20 minutes. I used the time to rehearse nothing. I had spent decades rehearsing patience, rehearsing acceptance, rehearsing the role of grateful stepmother to sons who despised me. Today, I would simply be myself, a woman who had been wronged, a woman who held the truth, a woman who was done pretending. The Dunn and Associates building rose against the October sky, all glass and steel and corporate ambition. I had been here before, signing documents I did not fully understand, trusting Percy's judgment, trusting Flynn's guidance. Those days were over. I parked in the garage and checked my reflection one final time. The woman in the mirror looked calm, composed, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with volume or threats. For 24 years, I had been Percy's wife, Gordon and Clayton's stepmother, the woman who kept the peace, who smoothed over conflicts, who pretended not to notice the contempt in their eyes. Today, I would be something else entirely. Today, I would be their reckoning. When I walked through those glass doors, I was not walking into a meeting. I was walking into the end of their world. They just did not know it yet. The lobby was quiet, professional. A receptionist smiled and directed me to the elevators. I rode up alone, watching the floor numbers climb, feeling my heartbeat steady and slow. No fear, no hesitation, just the calm certainty of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see them all waiting. Gordon was pacing near the windows, his phone clutched in one hand, his other hand running repeatedly through his hair. Clayton sat slumped in a chair, his face gray with exhaustion or fear, I could not tell which. Sonia perched beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the supportive wife even now. Flynn Dunn stood at the head of the table, looking more uncomfortable than I had ever seen him. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the wariness of a man who sensed something was very wrong, but could not identify what. And beside my empty chair, calm as still water, sat Theodore Platt. His briefcase rested at his feet. His hands were folded on the table. He looked up as I approached and gave me the smallest nod. I pushed open the conference room door. I took my seat at the mahogany table, directly across from the two men who had called me mother while plotting to destroy me. The conference room fell silent as I settled into the leather chair. Gordon stopped pacing. Clayton straightened in his seat, his hands flattening on the table as if bracing for impact. Sonia sat beside him with mascara smeared beneath her eyes, the picture of a supportive wife in crisis. Flynn Dunn occupied the head of the table, looking like a man caught between warring armies and uncertain which side would emerge victorious. Theodore Platt sat to my right, his briefcase at his feet, his hands folded calmly on the table. He gave me the smallest nod of acknowledgement, a general recognizing his commander had arrived. "Now that everyone's here," Flynn said, clearing his throat, "perhaps we can sort out this confusion. There seem to be some questions about certain documents." "Questions!" Gordon cut him off, his voice sharp with practiced outrage. "There's no question, Flynn. Someone is trying to defraud this estate." He turned to face me, and I watched his expression shift into something designed to look like concern. The same expression he had worn at Percy's funeral. The same expression he had worn when telling me I had 30 days to vacate my home. Watch Gordon's face as he speaks. Watch how his eyes never quite meet mine. That is the tell of a man who knows he is lying and believes he is getting away with it. "Mother," Gordon said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, "we're worried someone is taking advantage of your grief. You've been through so much these past weeks. It would be understandable if you weren't thinking clearly." "Very understandable," Clayton added quickly, nodding so vigorously I thought he might strain his neck. "These so-called documents this man claims to have," Gordon gestured dismissively at Theodore. "They're fabrications, forgeries designed to confuse you and steal from the estate. From you. From all of us." Theodore said nothing. His expression remained perfectly neutral, the calm of a man who had sat through 1,000 accusations and emerged unscathed from every one. "We've done some research on Platt and Associates," Gordon continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "This firm has no significant presence in Charlotte. No major clients, no reputation to speak of. They're opportunists. Mother, they heard about Dad's death and saw a vulnerable widow with money." "That's exactly what we thought," Clayton chimed in. "Someone at the courthouse, maybe. Someone who reads obituaries looking for targets." I let them talk. I let them build their castle of lies brick by brick, knowing I held the wrecking ball. "We're family," Gordon said, his voice softening into something meant to sound paternal. "We would never do anything to hurt you. Dad trusted us to take care of you after he was gone. But these people," another contemptuous gesture toward Theodore, "they don't have your best interests at heart. They're trying to drive a wedge between us." How many times had I sat across from these men at family dinners, never knowing what lived behind their smiles? How many Thanksgivings and Christmases had I hosted in good faith while they calculated how much they would inherit when Percy died? "The documents they're pushing are clearly fraudulent," Gordon concluded. "No legitimate attorney would produce papers that contradict a properly executed will. Whatever these people have told you, whatever they've convinced you to believe, it's a scam, pure and simple." He sat back, satisfied with his performance. Clayton was nodding again, his face arranged in an expression of brotherly solidarity. Sonia dabbed at her eyes, though I noticed no actual tears. Flynn shifted uncomfortably at the head of the table. "Perhaps we should examine these documents before making accusations, if there are irregularities." "There are no irregularities," Gordon snapped. "The will I showed you is the valid will. Anything else is fabrication." "Mr. Thornton." Theodore's voice was quiet, but carried across the room like a blade. "Are you quite finished?" Gordon's eyes narrowed. "I don't know who you think you are, but you have no standing here. This is a family matter." "I think you'll find I have considerable standing," Theodore replied calmly. "Given that I was retained by Percy Thornton himself 9 months before his death." The room went very still. When Gordon finished speaking, everyone had been looking at me, waiting for the broken widow to crumble, waiting for the tears, the confusion, the desperate plea for her stepsons to help her understand. Instead, I smiled. "Mr. Platt," I said, my voice steady as stone, "would you like to explain to my stepsons why their father retained your firm in the first place?" "I would be happy to," Theodore said, reaching for his briefcase. "And perhaps," I continued, watching Gordon's face drain of color, You could also explain why Percy Thornton terminated Flynn Dunn's representation 2 months before he died, and why Mr. Dunn apparently forgot to mention that to anyone in this room. Flynn's head snapped toward me. Gordon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Clayton looked between them, confusion finally cracking his rehearsed solidarity. Theodore opened his briefcase and began pulling out folders. "Shall we start with the gambling debts?" he asked pleasantly, "or the forged signatures?" Flynn Dunn's face went the color of old paper. He had not known Percy fired him. The realization spread across his features like a stained shock. Then confusion. Then the dawning horror of a man watching his professional reputation crumble in real time. "I don't understand," Flynn said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Percy never said anything about terminating our relationship. We spoke regularly until you stopped being useful," Theodore said calmly. "Your father discovered that someone in Mr. Dunn's office was feeding information about his estate planning to you and your brother." He looked directly at Gordon. "Every document Percy filed, every revision to his will, you knew about it within days." Flynn's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I had no idea. I never authorized anyone to share confidential client information." "Perhaps not," Theodore continued, "but it happened. A paralegal, we believe, though the investigation is ongoing. Regardless, Percy couldn't take the risk that his plans would be compromised. So he came to me 9 months ago with instructions to investigate both of his sons." Gordon's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. Dad would never." "Your father would, and did." Theodore opened his briefcase and began laying documents across the mahogany table with the precision of a dealer spreading cards. "He loved you both, despite everything. But he wasn't blind." Each photograph Theodore laid down was another nail in a coffin Gordon and Clayton had been building for themselves. The first set showed Gordon entering a casino in Atlantic City, then another casino, then another. 12 visits documented across 8 months, each one time-stamped and photographed. Gordon at poker tables, Gordon at ATM machines, Gordon signing markers that would come due with interest. $250,000 in gambling debts, Theodore said quietly. Creditors circling. Your law practice hemorrhaging money. And then there are these. He laid down a second stack. Forged signatures on loan documents, using your father's business as collateral without his knowledge or consent. Gordon's face had gone from confident to gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Theodore turned to Clayton. "And you, Mr. Thornton, perhaps you'd like to explain Blue Harbor Holdings." Clayton's head snapped up. For the first time since I had entered the room, he looked truly afraid. "That's a legitimate consulting business." "It's a Ponzi scheme." Theodore fanned bank records across the table. Over $300,000 stolen from elderly clients. Falsified returns, fabricated statements, wire fraud across state lines. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Federal charges, Mr. Thornton, not just state." You should have seen their faces. Gordon, who had called me mother while planning to leave me homeless. Clayton, who had stolen from people exactly like me. Retirees who trusted their financial advisor, who believed his kind smile and good family reputation. Sonia had stopped dabbing at her eyes. She was staring at Clayton with an expression I recognized, the slow, terrible realization that she had married a stranger. Flynn Dunn sat frozen at the head of the table, his carefully neutral expression shattered. He was watching his clients be exposed as criminals in his own conference room with evidence he had never seen. "Your father documented everything," I said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. "Every debt, every forgery, every stolen dollar. He spent his last months building a case against both of you." "You're lying," Gordon managed. "Dad would have confronted us. He would have what? Given you a chance to hide the evidence, destroy the records." I shook my head slowly. "Percy knew his sons. He knew exactly what you would do if confronted. So he built his case in silence, and he left it for me. The evidence covered the table like a crime scene exhibit, because that was exactly what it was." Gordon found his voice first, grasping for the only weapon he had left. Even if this is true, it doesn't change the will. Dad left the properties to us, the business shares. You can waive all the photographs you want, but legally you have no claim to contest." "Actually," Theodore said, reaching into his briefcase one final time, "there's one more document Mrs. Thornton asked me to bring." He pulled out a heavy envelope and slid it across the table toward Gordon. "This is the authentic last will and testament of Percy Thornton, executed 6 weeks before his death, while he was lucid and legally competent, witnessed and notarized, according to North Carolina law." Gordon stared at the envelope without touching it. "The will you've been operating under was superseded," Theodore continued. "This document, the real will, changes everything." "What does it say?" Clayton's voice came out as a croak. I reached across the table and opened the envelope myself. I withdrew the pages, held them up so both brothers could see Percy's signature at the bottom, and read the clause that mattered. "I leave the decision of what, if anything, my sons shall inherit entirely to my beloved wife Viola, trusting in her wisdom and judgment to determine what they deserve." The words hung in the air. Gordon and Clayton stared at me, the stepmother they had dismissed for 24 years, the widow they had planned to leave with nothing, and finally understood the position they were in. Everything Percy had owned now belonged to me, and I would decide their fate. The will was dated October 3rd, 6 weeks before Percy died, when his mind was still razor sharp and his intentions crystal clear. Gordon stared at the document in my hands, as if it might burst into flames and solve his problems. Clayton had gone pale beside him. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The will they had been relying on, the one that gave them everything and left me with scraps, was legally void. "You can't, that's not—" Gordon's voice strangled on the words. "Dad would never cut us out. We're his sons." "He didn't cut you out," I said quietly. "He gave the decision to me, because he knew exactly what you were planning, and he wanted me to have the choice of how to respond." "This won't hold up in court." Gordon was grasping now, a drowning man reaching for anything. "We'll contest it." Mental incompetence, undue influence. The will was witnessed by Theodore Platt and notarized by a licensed official. Theodore interrupted calmly. "Your father's oncologist provided a letter confirming his mental competence on the date of signing. The document is airtight, Mr. Thornton. I made certain of that." This was the moment when Gordon Thornton, patent attorney, learned what it felt like to be completely outmaneuvered. Every stratagem, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty he had deployed against me, all of it rendered meaningless by a few pages of legal text. "So what do you want?" Gordon demanded. "Money. Is that what this is about?
Name your price."
"I don't want your money." "Gordon." I reached into my purse and withdrew the gift deed Theodore had prepared. "I've decided to give you exactly what you asked for." I slid the document across the mahogany table. "The house, the beach property, all yours, just as you demanded at the funeral." Clayton's eyes lit up for just a moment, pure, reflexive greed cutting through his fear. Then I continued speaking, and the light died. With the mortgage attached to the Charlotte house and the liens on the Outer Banks property, Gordon picked up the gift deed and began reading. I watched his expression shift as the numbers registered. "Percy refinanced both properties 6 months before he died," Theodore explained, his voice almost pleasant. "The Charlotte house carries a mortgage of $1.4 million. The beach cottage has an additional $1 million in secured liens. Percy had wrapped a bomb in gift paper, and I was handing it to his sons with a bow on top. You're inheriting real estate worth approximately $2 million, Theodore continued, with $2.4 million in debt attached. The math is straightforward, gentlemen." Clayton finally found his voice. That can't be right. The properties are worth... They were worth more before the refinancing. Now they're underwater. Theodore folded his hands on the table. "You owe $600,000 more than the properties are worth. Congratulations on your inheritance." The math was simple. Properties worth $2 million, mortgages totaling $2.4 million. They were $600,000 in the hole before they even started. "You can't do this," Gordon said, but his voice had lost its force. This is entrapment, fraud. We'll sue." "Sue for what?" I asked. "I'm giving you exactly what you demanded. The properties you insisted were rightfully yours. The inheritance you couldn't wait to claim." I let the silence stretch. Percy structured this very carefully. "Gordon, every document is legitimate. Every transfer is legal. You wanted the real estate. Here it is." Sonia was crying openly now. Not for me, never for me, but for the lifestyle she saw evaporating before her eyes. The Myers Park mansion, with its designer furniture and imported art, the luxury cars, the country club memberships, all of it had been built on Clayton's fraud, and now it was crumbling. "You can refuse the gift," Theodore said. "That's entirely within your rights." "Of course. Refusal means you receive nothing from your father's estate. No properties, no business shares, no cash. Just the evidence of your crimes, which Mrs. Thornton would then be free to share with the appropriate authorities." Gordon stared at the gift deed like it was a live grenade. "Or," Theodore continued, "you can accept the gift. The properties become yours, along with all associated debts. Given your current financial situations, the gambling debts, the fraud exposure, the creditors already circling, I doubt any bank will refinance you, but at least you won't be in prison." "Prison," Clayton's voice cracked on the word. "Wire fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery." Theodore ticked off the charges on his fingers. "Federal and state charges, Mr. Thornton. Your father documented enough evidence to ensure convictions. Mrs. Thornton has graciously chosen not to pursue criminal prosecution, provided you accept the gift." The conference room had gone completely silent. Flynn Dunn sat frozen at the head of the table, watching his clients face destruction. Gordon gripped the gift deed with white knuckles. Clayton had stopped breathing entirely. "Sign the deed," I said quietly, "and walk away with debt you created through your own greed, or refuse, and face the consequences your father documented in detail. I placed a pen on the table between them. The choice is yours. Gordon's hand hovered over the gift deed. Trembling with rage he could no longer hide. The pen sat on the table between us. The silence stretched. Every person in that conference room was holding their breath, waiting to see what Gordon Thornton would do when cornered with no escape. "If you refuse the gift and choose to fight," Theodore said calmly, "Mrs. Thornton will pursue criminal charges, elder abuse, grand larceny, wire fraud. The evidence is overwhelming." "You're bluffing," Gordon said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Gordon, 5 to 10 years, given the forgery and financial manipulation. Clayton, potentially longer. Given the number of elderly victims in his fraud scheme." Theodore's tone remained conversational, almost pleasant. "These aren't estimates. I've consulted with 3 different prosecutors. All of them were very interested in what we've documented." Gordon looked at me. For the first time since I had known him, I saw something other than contempt in his eyes. I saw fear. "You can't do this," he said. "Dad would never have wanted. Your father could have had you both arrested while he was alive." I interrupted quietly. "He had the evidence. He had the contacts. He chose not to. Instead, he gave me the decision. This is my decision." I watched Gordon calculate his options and find none. For a man who had spent his entire life manipulating outcomes, controlling narratives, bending situations to his advantage, it must have been unbearable. The patent attorney who never lost a case, outmaneuvered by a stepmother he had dismissed for 24 years. "Sign the deed," I continued, "and you walk out of here with debt instead of handcuffs." "Refuse." And I pick up the phone to the district attorney's office. "Those are your only options. Gordon, your father made sure of that." Clayton was staring at the table, his face gray. Sonia had stopped crying, replaced by a stillness that suggested she was already calculating her exit strategy. Divorce papers, I suspected, would be filed before the month was out. Flynn Dunn remained frozen at the head of the table, a man watching his client's destruction and unable to do anything about it. His reputation would survive barely, but he would never look at me the same way again. "Good." Gordon picked up the pen. For a long moment, he simply held it, as if the weight of what he was about to do had paralyzed his hand. Then, with a sharp exhale, he signed his name on the line Theodore had indicated. The pen scratched across the paper. 24 years of scheming destroyed in 3 seconds of ink. He slid the document to Clayton without a word. His brother took it with shaking hands, stared at the signature line, and signed beneath Gordon's name. When Clayton's pen hit the paper, something broke in him. I could see it in his eyes the moment he realized his father had known everything, planned everything, and chosen me over them. Percy had loved his sons, but he had loved me more. And in the end, he had trusted me with the power to decide their fate. I had chosen mercy, debt instead of prison, financial ruin instead of criminal records. But mercy, I was learning, could be its own kind of punishment. Theodore gathered the signed documents and slid them into his briefcase. The transaction was complete. The trap had sprung. The brothers were now the proud owners of properties worth less than nothing. "We're done here," Gordon said, standing abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. "Clayton, Sonia, we're leaving." Clayton rose like a man moving through water, slow and disoriented. Sonia followed, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood as she crossed the room without looking at her husband. At the door, Gordon paused. He turned back to face me. And in that moment, all pretense of civility had vanished. What remained was pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over," he said, his voice raw. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." They left like men walking to their own execution, which, financially speaking, they were. "Yes, Gordon," I replied, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "It is, completely." The conference room door clicked shut behind them. I sat alone with Theodore Platt and the signed documents, surrounded by the wreckage of a family I had belonged to for 24 years. Flynn Dunn had retreated to his office without a word, leaving us in the silence of aftermath. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Charlotte spread out beneath the October sky. I had arrived in this city as Percy's bride, uncertain of my place, eager to be accepted by his sons. I had spent 2 decades trying to earn affection that was never going to come. Now it was over. The pretending, the hoping, the enduring, all of it finished. "It's done," Theodore said quietly. "The property's transferred to them immediately. The first mortgage payment is due in 3 weeks. After that, the banks will begin collection proceedings." I nodded but did not speak. "What now, Mrs. Thornton?" I looked out at the skyline, the towers and cranes, the city that had been my home for so long, and yet never quite felt like home at all. "Now," I said slowly, "I start living." Victory, I discovered, tastes different than I had imagined. Not sweet, but strange and hollow, like an echo in an empty room. The morning after the confrontation, I sat in Percy's office holding his letter for the 10th time. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. No stepsons to manage, no pretenses to maintain, no family dinners where I smiled through contempt I pretended not to notice. Just silence, and the fading scent of Percy's cologne on the leather chair, and the weight of everything that had happened settling into my bones. I read the letter again, tracing his familiar handwriting with my fingertip. He had written it knowing I would find it after he was gone, knowing his sons would show their true colors, knowing I would need to understand why he had done what he did. "I couldn't bear to watch them destroy you," he had written near the end. "You deserve better than to be left with nothing after giving me everything. The boys will hate you when they discover what I've done." But hatred from them was inevitable, my love. At least this way, you'll be hated while holding all the cards. Is it revenge when you simply stop preventing someone from destroying themselves? Percy had not attacked his sons. He had just stepped out of the way and let gravity do its work. The debts, the fraud, the gambling. Those were choices Gordon and Clayton had made all on their own. Percy had merely ensured they would face the consequences. I set the letter down and looked around the office. This room had been Percy's sanctuary, the place where he had conducted his secret war. Now it was mine, along with the house, the hidden accounts, the protected trusts that would keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. I was wealthy, I was free, and I had no idea what to do with either of those things. 3 weeks passed. The autumn deepened, trees along the Charlotte streets turning gold and crimson. I spent most of my time in the house, sorting through Percy's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate. The sympathy cards were long since thrown away. The funeral flowers had become compost. Life continued its slow, indifferent march. Theodore Platt called on a Thursday afternoon, his voice carefully neutral. "I have news about Gordon," he said. "He filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy yesterday." I sat down in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. "The mortgage payments came due 3 weeks ago. He tried to refinance, but no bank would touch him. The gambling debts showed up on his credit report, and his income couldn't support the loan. He defaulted. The foreclosure process has already begun." Gordon had built his empire on sand and borrowed money. The tide had finally come in. "His law practice?" I asked. Shuddered. "He's been court-ordered to attend gambling addiction counseling as part of a creditor settlement. His professional reputation is effectively destroyed." Theodore paused. "I thought you should know." I felt nothing like triumph, just a tired satisfaction that justice had found its way home. Gordon Thornton, the patent attorney who had called me mother while calculating how to leave me homeless, he was now sitting in a circle of strangers, explaining his addiction to people who had never heard of Percy Thornton's estate. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "There's something else." Theodore's voice shifted, taking on a careful quality I had learned to recognize. "Clayton's situation is developing as well. Some of his victims, the elderly clients he defrauded, they've been talking to each other, comparing notes, realizing they weren't the only ones." "Are they pressing charges?" "Some of them are. The State Attorney General's office has opened an investigation. It's not public yet, but it will be soon." He paused again. "And Mrs. Thornton Sonia has filed for divorce. I tell you this not to celebrate their fall, but to show you what happens when greed writes checks the soul cannot cash." Gordon and Clayton had spent years building lives on fraud and manipulation. They had convinced themselves that the rules did not apply to them, that consequences were for other people, that they could take whatever they wanted without ever paying the price. They were wrong. "The family is disintegrating," I said quietly. It was not a question. "It was never much of a family," Theodore replied. "At least not one that included you." He was right. I had spent 24 years trying to belong to a family that had never wanted me. I had smiled through insults, absorbed contempt, pretended not to notice the way Gordon and Clayton looked at me, as if I were a temporary inconvenience, an obstacle to be removed when Percy finally died. Now they were the ones being removed, piece by piece, consequence by consequence. The Thornton sons were learning what it felt like to be disposable. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet kitchen as evening shadows crept across the floor. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the ghosts of all those tense family dinners had finally found somewhere else to haunt. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start making plans. Real plans for a real future, one that belonged entirely to me. But tonight, I would simply sit with the silence and let the past finish dying. Watching a family disintegrate is like watching a building collapse in slow motion. You know how it ends, but you cannot look away. The news about Clayton arrived in fragments over the following weeks. Theodore called with updates, his voice carefully neutral as he reported each new development in the ongoing destruction of Percy's younger son. The Charlotte Business Journal ran a small piece in early November. Local financial advisor accused of defrauding elderly clients. They did not mention he was Percy Thornton's son. Small mercies, I supposed. But the damage was done. Clayton's victims had found each other, comparing notes, realizing the scope of what he had stolen. 12 families organized a civil lawsuit. The state attorney general was reviewing the evidence for potential criminal charges. He lost the Myers Park house in foreclosure last week, Theodore reported during one of our calls. The bank took everything. He's been working nights at a hotel near the airport. A hotel. Night manager. His mother took him in. He's living in her guest room in Greensboro. Theodore paused. The state AG is still deciding whether to file charges. But even without prison, his life as he knew it is over. Clayton had climbed so high on other people's stolen dreams. Now he was learning what the ground felt like. The man who had called me mother while systematically defrauding elderly clients was now making beds and restocking minibars. The irony was not lost on me. He had stolen retirement savings from people who trusted him, and now he was earning minimum wage, while those same victims pursued him through civil court. I felt no joy in his fall. But I felt no sorrow either. Clayton had made his choices. He was simply living with the consequences. December brought frost to Charlotte and the final dissolution of what remained of the Thornton family. The divorce papers arrived in Theodore's office first. He forwarded me copies as a courtesy. Sonia had filed in Fulton County, Georgia. Brief, brutal paperwork that demanded nothing except freedom. No alimony, no property division, just a clean severing of ties. She took back her maiden name, Theodore said. Sonia Jennings now. She's living with her sister in Atlanta. I thought about Sonia at that dinner table, crying over her disappearing lifestyle. She had known what Clayton was. She must have known the expensive furniture, the luxury cars, the vacations they could not afford on a legitimate consulting income. She had just bet on never getting caught. Do I feel sorry for Sonia? She knew. She had to have known. She chose to look away, to enjoy the stolen money without asking where it came from. Now she was starting over in a city where no one knew the Thornton name. Maybe that was its own kind of punishment. Maybe it was also a mercy. The Charlotte house felt different as winter deepened. Quieter, larger. The rooms that had once held family dinners and holiday gatherings now echoed with absence. Percy was gone. His sons were ruined. The daughter-in-law, who had tolerated me for years, had fled to another state. I walked through the halls where I had lived for over 2 decades, touching door frames and windowsills, remembering the woman I had been when I first arrived, so eager to be accepted, so willing to overlook the contempt in my stepson's eyes. That woman was gone too. The family I had married into 24 years ago no longer existed. Percy was dead. His sons were bankrupt. And I was still standing, wealthy, free, and utterly alone. But alone. I was discovering did not have to mean lonely. It could also mean unburdened, unobligated, ready to build something new. That week, I made 2 decisions. The first was practical: sell the Charlotte house. I did not need 7 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. I did not need the memories that lived in every corner, the ghosts of dinners where I had smiled through insults, the leather chair where Percy had died. It was time to start fresh, somewhere new. The second decision was about legacy. Percy had spent his final months building me a fortress against his sons. He had documented their crimes, restructured his assets, created the trap that ultimately destroyed them. But he had done it out of love, not just for me, but for justice itself. He had believed that consequences should follow actions, that the truth should eventually emerge. I wanted to honor that. I called Theodore on a Thursday morning, December frost still clinging to the windows. I want to establish a foundation, I said, for victims of family financial abuse, people who have been stolen from by the people who should have protected them. There was a pause on the line. When Theodore spoke again, his voice was warm. What would you call it? The Percy Thornton Foundation for Financial Justice. The words felt right as I said them. His sons tried to destroy his name. I want to make sure it stands for something better. I think Percy would have liked that, Theodore said quietly. I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline, gray with winter clouds, somewhere out there. Gordon was attending court-mandated counseling. Clayton was working overnight shifts. Sonia was rebuilding her life in Atlanta. And I was building something new, something that would outlast all of us. The realtor walked through Percy's office with measuring tape and dollar signs in her eyes. And I felt something shift inside me. Permission to let go. She was a brisk woman in her 50s, efficient and unsentimental, which was exactly what I needed. She did not ask why I was selling. She did not offer condolences or probe into the family drama that had made local business news. She simply measured rooms, noted features, and quoted me a price that would have seemed impossible when I first married Percy. $920,000, she said. Maybe more, if we stage it right. This neighborhood is hot right now. I signed the listing agreement that afternoon. The house sold in 2 weeks. Cash buyers. A young couple expecting their first child. They walked through the rooms where I had spent 24 years and saw only possibility. A nursery here, a home office there, a kitchen they could renovate into something modern and bright. They love the bones of it, the realtor told me. They'll make it their own. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Some houses hold you hostage with memories. Selling was cutting the last chain. On the final day, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The furniture was gone, donated or sold. The closet stood open, bare and waiting for someone else's clothes. Percy's office was just 4 walls now. The leather chair and mahogany desk long since removed. I stood where his chair had been, the spot where he had worked late into so many nights, building the trap that would eventually protect me, the place where he had died, quietly and alone, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of carrying burdens I never knew about. Thank you, I said to the empty room, for everything. The check arrived 3 days later. Combined with the protected accounts Percy had established, I was worth more than I could spend in several lifetimes. But walking out of that house for the final time, that was the real fortune. You might wonder why I did not just take the money and disappear, start over somewhere warm, live out my years in comfortable anonymity, forget the Thorntons and everything they had put me through. But Percy taught me something in those final months of his life. Wealth is a tool. The question is what you build with it. I drove to Theodore's office on a December morning, frost still clinging to the Charlotte streets. He had prepared the documents I requested, spread across his desk in neat stacks, awaiting my signature. The Percy Thornton Foundation for Financial Justice, Theodore read aloud from the charter, providing legal support and financial education for victims of family financial abuse. The words felt right. They felt necessary. This is what he would have wanted, I said. Not revenge, not destruction. Something that helps people. Theodore nodded slowly. It's not the legacy his sons expected to leave, but it's the one that matters. The foundation would provide free legal consultations for people who had been financially exploited by family members, spouses, children, parents, anyone who had used trust as a weapon. It would fund education programs to help people recognize the warning signs before it was too late. And it would offer emergency grants to victims who had lost everything the way I nearly had. Clients like Eleanor Whitfield and the Jennings family. Clayton's victims would be among the first to receive support. Their stolen retirement savings could not be fully recovered, but the foundation could help them rebuild. Pain transformed into purpose. I signed each document carefully, my handwriting steady. Theodore witnessed each signature, his expression somewhere between professional satisfaction and genuine warmth. When I signed the final page, I felt Percy beside me, not as a ghost, I did not believe in ghosts, but as a presence, a weight of approval, a sense that somehow, wherever he was proud of what I was building from the wreckage his sons had created. "That's everything," Theodore said, gathering the documents. "The foundation will be officially established by the end of the month. The first grant applications can go out in January." Good. I sat back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in months. That's good. One more question. Theodore set down the papers and looked at me directly. "Have you chosen where you'll go?" I had thought about it every night since deciding to sell the house. I did not want to stay in Charlotte. Too many memories, too much proximity to the ruins of the Thornton family. I did not want to move somewhere I had never been, starting completely from scratch at 64. But there was one place that had stayed in my mind. A charming coastal city I had visited once with Percy early in our marriage, full of old oak trees draped in Spanish moss, historic squares lined with azaleas, restaurants where we had laughed over oysters and sweet tea, a place where new beginnings felt possible, even at my age. "Savannah," I said, and smiled at the rightness of it. "I'm going to plant a garden." Theodore smiled back. "Percy would have liked that," he said. "He always said you had a gift for making things grow." 3 months after the conference room reckoning, I woke to silence and smiled. The cottage in Savannah's historic district was nothing like the Charlotte house. Small, where that had been sprawling. Warm, where that had been imposing. Mine, in a way, the other house had never quite managed to be, despite 24 years of trying. I had purchased it outright with cash. No mortgage, no debt, no stepsons showing up with documents to sign or demands to meet. Just a wraparound porch, a back garden waiting to be planted, and Spanish moss dripping from the oak trees like curtains of gray-green lace. I chose Savannah because Percy brought me here on our honeymoon 23 years ago. Different house, same city, same sense of possibility. We had walked these squares holding hands, eaten oysters at restaurants that no longer existed, laughed at a cafe near the river, while he promised me adventures. He had kept that promise, even from beyond the grave. My morning routine was simple now. Coffee on the porch, watching tourists photograph the famous oaks, the creak of the swing beneath me, steam rising from my cup into the January air. Sometimes a neighbor would wave as they walked their dog. I would wave back a woman they knew only as the new widow from North Carolina, quiet and kind, with a garden she was always working on. The Spanish moss swayed in the morning breeze, and the light filtered through it like something from a dream. I had spent so many years in Charlotte, surrounded by noise, the brothers' demands, the social obligations, the constant performance of being Percy Thornton's wife. Here, the silence was different. Not oppressive, not lonely, just peaceful. I thought sometimes about Gordon and Clayton. Theodore sent me occasional updates, brief, factual, delivered without commentary. Gordon was still in bankruptcy proceedings. Clayton had accepted a plea deal on reduced charges, avoiding prison but losing his professional licenses permanently. The foreclosed properties had sold at auction, the proceeds going to creditors who would never fully recover what they were owed. The brothers were still alive, still somewhere out there, still bearing the Thornton name. But they were no longer my burden to carry. Percy had made sure of that. I remembered our honeymoon with startling clarity these days. Percy laughing at that cafe near the river, his hand warm on mine, telling me that life was about to become an adventure. He had been right, though not in the way either of us expected. The adventure had included cancer and betrayal and a war fought in shadows. But it had also included this me, sitting on a porch in Savannah, free and wealthy and finally at peace. The foundation had launched its first scholarship last week, a grant for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse widows cheated by in-laws, mothers betrayed by children, wives whose husbands had hidden assets and fled, women like me, who had trusted the wrong people and paid the price. The Percy Thornton Foundation for Financial Justice would help them find attorneys, rebuild their credit, start over. Pain transformed into purpose. That was Percy's real legacy, not the sons who bore his name. In the afternoon, I went into the back garden to plant azaleas, Percy's favorites, the pink ones, that bloomed every spring in waves of color so bright they almost hurt to look at. I had ordered them from a nursery in Charleston, and they had arrived that morning in careful packaging, roots wrapped in burlap. I knelt in the dirt and dug holes for each plant, soil under my fingernails, sun on my face. The simple physical work of making something grow. As I patted the earth around the roots, I thought about the papers I had signed that October morning in the conference room. The brothers had watched me sign with triumph in their eyes, convinced they had won. Their lawyer had turned pale when he read what I had actually put my name to. They thought my signatures meant surrender. They were wrong. Percy knew his sons. He knew they would circle like vultures the moment he was gone. So he built me an escape route disguised as a trap. The gift deed that transferred the mortgage properties to them. The foundation documents that turned hidden accounts into protected assets. The will that gave me everything while appearing to give me nothing. I signed the gift deed that transferred their inheritance into crushing debt. I signed the foundation paperwork that created something lasting from our wealth. I signed my freedom. The wind stirred the Spanish moss above me, and for a moment I could almost feel Percy there. Not a ghost. I still did not believe in ghosts, but a presence nonetheless, a sense of approval, of love that had outlasted even death. "Thank you," I whispered to the garden, to the moss, to whatever part of him might still be listening, for everything. The azaleas would bloom in spring. The foundation would help women like me for years to come. And I would sit on this porch every morning, drinking coffee, watching the oak trees, living the life Percy had fought to give me. I had signed the papers, all of them, and I had won. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. Looking back on my life story, I realize I spent 24 years avoiding conflict with people who never respected me. I trusted when I should have questioned. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're standing at a funeral to wonder if the people around you truly have your best interests at heart. Pay attention to the warning signs before it's too late. Some might call this a revenge story. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about a husband who loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. Percy knew his sons. He knew they would circle like vultures. And he made sure I had the tools to protect myself. I believe God placed Percy in my life story for a reason. To show me that love doesn't end when someone passes. Sometimes it simply changes form. This revenge story taught me that patience and truth will always win in the end. If this life story touched you, if you've ever faced betrayal from people you trusted, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, do you think I did the right thing? Was this truly a revenge story or something deeper? Please share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Thank you for listening to this life story. It means more than you know. Please remember, some names and details have been changed for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. What matters most is the lesson it carries.